Here means carrier. Carrier of pollen grains. How these pollen grains are transferred from one plant to another plant. As you all know, plants cannot move from one place to another. They need the help of other organisms, animals or natural elements to transfer their pollen grain. So this natural element, animal as well as organism, helps in transferring of pollen grains from the anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower. They are therefore called agents of pollination. First one, that means first agent is wind. Wind, you already know that wind is the movement of air relative to the surface of earth. Flowers of grasses such as rice, maize and so on are pollinated by wind. Wind pollinated flowers show the following characteristics. That means if male reproductive unit is present in one flower and female reproductive unit is present in another flower, then how these pollen grains are transferred? The plant cannot move to the female reproductive plant. So what happens in this case? These pollen grains are transferred by the help of agents, that is what? Wind, water, insects or animal. Then here firstly we will discuss about pollination by wind. Then in this, firstly we will see the characteristics of flower which is pollinated by the help of wind. So first one is pollen grains are dry and light that can be easily blown by the wind. Pollen grains, which is male reproductive unit, in this they are made dry as well as light enough so that they can be easily transferred to stigma of another flower. Second one is the pollen grains are produced in a large quantity. Since a large number of them may not reach the stigma of a flower, in this what happens? Pollen grains are produced in maximum amount so that it can be transferred to a stigma. Every pollen grains cannot be transferred. Some may be fallen in the ground or some may be carried in another area. That is why, so as to reach to the stigma of the flower, these pollen grains are produced in a large quantity. Third one is the style. As soon as the pollen grain reaches to the stigma, this stigma projects out so as to receive the pollen grains. Alright. Second agent is insect. What happens in this? Insects such as bees and butterflies visit flowers. Generally they are visiting the flowers to collect nectar. Nectar, you know this is the sweet smelling liquid. This is serving as a food for the insects. In this process what happens? Pollen grains get stuck to their body parts. While visiting to the another flower, the pollen grain gets transferred to the stigma of that flower. This is the most common method of pollination. Flowers pollinated by insects show certain characteristics. First one, most flowers. So what happened in this? How insect visit flower? Just by attracting from the bright colors of the petals. Okay. For example, you can take rose, marigold, etc. Most flowers produce nectar. Nectar is also used as a attracting thing for the insects. Most flowers are sweet smelling. For example, night jasmine. This is also attracting thing only. The pollen grains and stigma of most of these flowers are sticky. Table 2.1 gives the differences between insect pollinated flowers as well as wind pollinated flowers. This you have to study and you have to note down the differences between the wind pollinated flower as well as insect pollinated flower. This will be easy for you to understand the differences between insect pollinated flowers and wind pollinated flower. Third agent is water. Pollination by water occurs in aquatic plants such as Hydrilla and Vallisneria. In Vallisneria, initially the male flower is submerged in water. What happens on maturity? Okay, this Vallisneria plant is floating. Not floating, you can say. They are submerged in the water, but when they get mature, it get detached. Detached means separated and floats on the surface of water. While floating, they comes in contact with the female flower and then the pollen grains are transferred to the stigma. This happens in pollination by water. Next is pollination by animals. Animals like birds, squirrels and bats also acts as agents of pollination. In this what happens? It is similarly like pollination by insects. Birds sit over the flower, collect nectar. While collecting the nectar, these pollen grains get attached to the body, and when they sit another flower, then that pollen grain is transferred to the stigma of the flower. In this way, the pollination occurs.